So it's sort of funny being the moderator for a one-person debate.
Yeah.
But we might as well try.
I don't know if I agree with you there.
Well, I don't know.
This is not a debate, that's just contradiction.
Oh Lord. We're going to go in Monty Python. So, President?
Let's start. CEO?
CEO?
No.
So, Mr. CEO.
Yes, sir.
Tell us your economic policy.
I was telling Peter beforehand that he can ask me any kind of question. I could turn into something I want to answer. So, the idea for Trello came to me about 5 years ago. But I noticed a lot of Post-it notes on people's whiteboards.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay. So Joel and I are both, how do I best put this? We've both been writing software for a long, long time. He's from New York. I'm from LA. That means automatically that, well, there's some differences. How many people here are from New York? Oh, okay, good. A few, a representative bunch. How many people here are from LA? It may be fewer. Okay, good. And the way that we're going to do this talk is we're going to sort of treat it as being a bit of a, I don't know, a liquid conversation, if we will. We've both traveled, you know, it's sort of funny because we both traveled on both sides of, well, similar rivers. He worked for Microsoft, I worked for Apple. He has done startups. I work for a city now, although I've done startups too. He may work for a city in the future. And in addition, over time, if you will, I think software and software development has really changed the world around us. So even though we're from, you know, if you will, opposite sides of the country, to a great degree, I think we probably both share a very common outlook, which is that we're really living in magical times. I mean, I hate to say it, to live and work in this industry at this time, well, we're a fairly lucky group of people, I think. At least that's the way I look at it. And towards that end, we may cover things like diversity, we may cover things like security, changing stuff, you know, crowdsourcing, all that sort of stuff. And at the end of this, we'll also take a few questions and see where you guys want to go that we may or may not have gone. And so with that, do you want to maybe just take us through a little bit of how you ended up here?
Sure.
Don't say an airplane. So.
Yeah, how I ended up here, I started, I graduated with a degree in computer science, went to work at Microsoft because that was, in 1991, one of the few companies that was hiring, and it seemed like a good place to work. I worked on the Excel team, was told, do something about the macros. Our macro language is a mess. Bill likes BASIC. That's what I was told. And so, so we did a thing called Visual Basic for Applications. I was a program manager for that, so designed Visual Basic for Applications. Ended up, probably might have come across you in the Apple campus at some point because I was also responsible for the program management of Mac Excel, which had to talk Apple events in those days, and there was a thing called Apple Script that was coming, and so we needed to come up with a strategy where Apple Script could be native on Mac and Visual Basic could be native on Windows. Moved to New York pretty quickly after that. Worked at a couple places in New York. I worked on the very first web servers for Viacom, working on websites for what used to be called Blockbuster. You could rent these boxes that had tapes, magnetic. Anyway, MTV, Comedy Central, Sundance Channel, a couple other Viacom properties that I worked on, like very, very early websites, like the very first MTV website. Went to Juno Online Services, which provided free email that probably many people in this room used when they were in junior high school, that provided, you know, modem dial-up email for free. And eventually started my own company because I saw a bunch of people that were obviously stupider than me, which was not hard, you know, raising a lot of money and starting big successful companies that didn't make any sense. And so I figured I could do at least not that badly and pull it off. And I was actually kind of the focus ever since 2000, and the thing I've been concerned about is I think that developers are kind of creating the future, and you already see it just in terms of, think about the way that your lives have changed, like how last year was different than 5 years ago, just in terms of almost anything that was done by a developer, the way that you pay people for things, the way that you get around a city, the way that you summon food to your abode. You know, for many people, these things have changed, and life is like literally changing. And it's changing according to a script that is written by programmers all day long. And to me, that means that programmers are sort of at the heart of our society, and they're kind of important. And I would look around and see that programmers are being treated essentially as typists by a lot of the big companies that were hiring them, who sort of thought they were kind of interchangeable extras in a cast of a million boring extras.
I sort of do remember there was a time where people were asked how many lines of code could they write in a day.
Yeah.
As if that was somehow a meaningful statistic.
Right. Yeah, and then people would brag about how many lines they could delete because they were like, I deleted 73 lines today. Yeah, it's really funny until you get fired for that. And I actually thought of programming as talent, right? Because you're writing the future. We want talent, and we don't just want any talent. We want great talent. And actually, Los Angeles is a city that understands the difference between being an extra and being the talent. Like you build your movie around the talent, and then you call over to Casting Central, and they send you 347 people that look like they might be a crowd in New Jersey or whatever.
Okay, so let's talk about this. Let's go deeper on the talent question.
Yeah.
You worked at MTV. It turns out I worked at MTV for a while too, which is in different eras. But tell me, when you think about talent and software engineering, developers, how do you grow the talent? How do you express it? How do you get people to be recognized for their talents?
Yeah, that's actually kind of what I've been working on for the whole time. So the contradiction I saw in 2000, I would look around and all these companies were desperate to hire developers. And you can actually go to any number of companies here, New York, Silicon Valley, and they'll all say, what's your biggest problem? We can't hire enough developers. We're not ... We've had these 12 openings since the beginning of time. If we could just hire enough developers, they're not good enough. And then they have, they may have a good hiring process or a poor hiring process. But there always seems to be a shortage, and that's, I guess, why this room we're in, General Assembly, is sort of like, all right, we could probably manufacture some more talent by training people, and that's awesome. And I'm in favor of that because this is a much better job than most of the people that are taking classes here are doing. I mean, being a programmer is a really great job, so that's wonderful. That said, simultaneously in 2000, you would look at those companies, and outside of, there was one exception, which is Microsoft, Silicon Valley, maybe Apple. You would look around and programmers were being treated like the gods that I think they are. But in New York,
and goddesses.
And goddesses, yes. Why does God imply masculinity? What is wrong with you? Sorry. In New York, however, they would sort of just cram a whole bunch of developers into rooms and sort of shoulder to shoulder, treat them poorly, give them little 19-inch monitors that were CRTs or whatever, and crappy chairs, and life was sort of miserable.
You've been inside of governments, haven't you?
Yeah, governments are still like that, actually. Oh my God, yes. Yeah, that's what it was like to work for like a rich Fortune 500 company as a programmer in New York, in the 90s. And what changed is, I started writing my blog. I don't want to say I really changed it, but I started writing my blog, talking about this kind of stuff. I'm like, here's how to be a more professional developer. Here's how to treat developers well. Here's how to attract developers. And then I started a company, Fog Creek, that was like, I'm just going to do this stuff, even if I can only do it for 8 people, because and then I'm going to blog about it, and I'm going to show them how it's done. And luckily, they were influential people that read that blog, and then they went and they started their companies that way. And they gave them free lunch, and they gave them foosball tables, and they gave them Aeron chairs, and they gave them sort of an assumption that there's a professionalism around software engineering that's important, that you're not just a typist, you're actually important. And even the truth is, some of the, I would say maybe overly restrictive hiring practices we have in place were at least put in place because we finally understood that the amount of talent that's needed to be a high-quality developer is very high.
Right. So you bring up a whole bunch of interesting points, which is that, in fact, I remember I once looked at a job at Microsoft, and I think I went through 18 interviews or something like that. Yeah. Anybody ever try to apply to Microsoft or one of those big companies?
It's usually like one day, but that's 6 or 7, yeah.
Oh yeah, no, it's some crazy thing. In fact, I remember one exercise. The questions that you get when you're applying to a big company like that can range from, I think I was asked, I could write a sorting routine, however you want. Okay, fine, that's no big deal. And then somebody said, take a blank sheet of paper and design a city.
Oh, that's a good one.
Yeah, you see? I eventually married an architect, but but I think the question that sort of comes up is that programming to a certain degree is a nonlinear talent, right? It's problem solving. against challenges that really people show up and say, hey, write a video game, or solve traffic in Los Angeles. Not that I ever think about that. Or, if you will, how are we going to apply data and software to sustainability, or how do we make a better financial system, and things like that. And so engineers, tend to be talent, but there's, the classic sort of CSEE degree doesn't necessarily take you straight to all the problem sets that are out there. And so how does Stack Overflow, really help folks, take, if you will, take a core set of skills within, let's say, a language or a set of languages, and apply them to the real world?
Well, maybe it doesn't, but
okay.
but it does something different, which is it allows people in the real world to actually write code, which didn't happen. So, a couple of stories I can tell there is when we were starting Stack Overflow, we had 1 million monthly uniques, and then we had 2 million monthly uniques, and then we had 3 million. And when we got to 6 million, Jeff Atwood and I were visiting the Microsoft campus, and we were visiting the Microsoft Developer Network team, which was what they then called developer relations at Microsoft. And I said to them, we have 6 million unique visitors, and because you guys are supposed to serve the needs of developers in the world, you must have done some research on how many developers there are in the entire world. And we're sort of curious as to when our growth is going to stop, because we already have 6 million.
What's your addressable audience?
Exactly. And they said, we'd say this is probably 9 million. Oh. And I said, okay, cool. So we hit 9 million, and then we hit 10 million, and 11 million, and 20 million. And now we're at something like 25 million of the world's 9 million programmers using Stack Overflow, which is awesome. And it has, admittedly, the growth in uniques is slowed a little bit. But I know what's going on there, actually, is that none of those people who are programming are programmers. Right. And that's kind of an amazing thing about what Stack Overflow is enabling, and a lot of other things. There have always been people that need to use programming. My mother is an English professor, and in the 60s, so the University of New Mexico got a mainframe computer, and they didn't know what to do with it, and they gave all the professors free accounts. And she said, I'm going to do some research project on Shakespeare, looking up words from Shakespeare in a concordance, on gigantic tapes and writing sorting algorithms in PL1 and stuff like that. And
wait, how many people here know what PL1 is? Anybody? Oh, wow. Okay, you're automatically excused.
This is a programming language that only applies to IBM mainframe computers of the 70s. And it was a gigantic committee-organized compromise between Fortran and COBOL. From a period when it was believed that you had to choose between Fortran and COBOL, which we can talk about for an hour, but I'll move on. My mom was a programmer, even though she was an English professor, and her love is Shakespeare. Like everybody, in science has to do some programming to even if it's just to analyze the data that you're doing. I have a friend who's in advertising, and he's a better Python programmer than I am. I have a friend who is I actually don't know Python, sorry, I really don't. But he's really good at it. And I have a friend who was in retail, was working. I mean, when I say retail, I mean he was working at Apple selling iPods to people that came to the Apple store. That was his job. And he's built a whole e-commerce site from like a 3-month beginning programming class. And it takes credit cards, and it shows maps, and little dots appear on the map showing things, and then it shows merchandise, and you order the merchandise, and then the merchandise arrives. And all of this stuff that he's built sort of has become possible because there's this great infrastructure of support around people that just want to use programming to do better stuff.
To solve problems.
Yeah.
So in the city of LA, we launched a big open data portal about 1.5 years ago, where you can go to data.lacity.org, and you'll see hundreds and hundreds of data sets, ranging on everything from all the checks that are written to how many ships come into the port, and sustainability, and you want information on traffic? We have information on traffic. And
there's a lot.
And what we do is that we've held a lot of hackathons where people come and they play with the data and they apply it towards a problem set. Sustainability, safety, you name it, right? Solve the budget crisis. Actually, there isn't a budget crisis right now, but you can solve it anyway. And the question I have is that most of the folks who show up at hackathons sort of break into two. They're the professional engineers, who sort of go from hackathon to hackathon to hackathon, and they've been doing this for a long, long time. And then there's a lot of folks who are simply, if you will, coming at the problem without necessarily a tremendous amount of sort of formal computer skills, but using the data and the tools that are available today to go and try to solve problems in their world. And it's really the growth of the ladder that is really fascinating. And so I guess a question I have for you is, how do you see this continuing? We're certainly seeing, if you will, nobody here has an IT department who puts all the apps on their phones, do they? Anybody? Good. But if you will,
does that exist?
Oh yeah, it does. We don't.
Those are the people that have two phones.
That's right.
Yeah, you see people with two phones. That's why.
Yeah. But the IT organizations that exist out there, the formal IT organizations that manage the computers and everything else, don't really exist in most of the world, right? And the professional engineering, I ran R&D at Qualcomm, big chip company, lots of really hardcore electrical engineers, radio engineers, software engineers, and all the rest of it. And then, if you will, there's this much, much larger group of people, which is really, I think, the folks that you're talking about that actually just take all the technologies that are available to them and really are, mixing and matching. It's almost like, making a meal, if you will, taking these ingredients. And I'd be really curious to see, to know what you think is going to happen over the next few years.
Well, I think we're just at the beginning of like this whole new way of developing stuff that is going to effectively. The way you'll see this is it'll be just a huge acceleration and an increase in speed of technology, especially around software and how software impacts our lives. So that sounds kind of bombastic, and let me pull that apart. And I'll give you like a very, very specific example of what I'm thinking about. So if you wanted to program in 1990, or if you were an electrical engineer and you wanted to build something at Qualcomm even today, you go back to first principles. You sort of start at first principles. So as a programmer, for example, you would read an entire book about how a programming language worked and probably practice so that you knew how to do it. And then you would be qualified to just about do anything that you're going to be called upon to do, because you're not really interacting with any other code. There's no other libraries out there. There's hardly any. And once a year, it might happen that somebody would say, oh, write a C program to, I don't know, drive a step motor in a microscope somewhere. And you would go read the interface library for the step motor, and you discover all the ins and outs that you had to push and poke, and you'd figure out how to do that from C, and you do it, and that would take you a couple of weeks. Done. Takes you that long. Now, compare that to a programmer today. A programmer today has not even learned the language that they're using, because maybe they're a server-side programmer and they learn Python and they know C++ from computer science, but they've never really had to learn JavaScript. So they've seen a bunch of JavaScript, so they're cutting and pasting a lot of JavaScript, and they pretty much know how to make a loop and that kind of stuff, but they've never read the book. So they're just sort of darting around with 30% knowledge of the language and probably making a lot of scary mistakes. But it's working anyway, and when it doesn't, they go to Stack Overflow, and somebody helps them. Or they, not a plug, it's part of the story. I don't need your questions, we get 8,000 questions a day. And then, but in the afternoon, somebody will say, oh, there's a new API that you can use to find out how much a lift is going to cost to get you from point A to point B, or an API that you can use to display a map, or an API that you can use from Stripe to accept payments. And it just came out this morning, and you could be installing it this afternoon. And in the old days, if you wanted to use some new API or something, you'd go to Barnes & Noble, and there'd be a book. It'd take a year, but there would be a book about how to use that thing.
Right, an O'Reilly book.
Yeah, it'd be a great O'Reilly book, and you would read the entire book, and then you would practice all the exercises and so forth. And you go home, and then you would be the one person in the office qualified to do, I don't know, credit card processing or something, because you had read the gigantic book. And today, it's just like, all right, I will type, how do I take credit cards on, from iOS in Swift, and then you land on, Stack Overflow, cut and paste into the code, and then it just works. And you don't even know what you were doing, or why it works, or how it works, or what. It's like, I don't know, somebody will call you up and say, I have a JCB card, like what the hell is that? And why isn't it not working with a JCB card? But there's a Stack Overflow article about that too. And eventually you make it work. But what you've done actually now is in about 7 hours, you've pulled together what used to take 93 years. Right. And you've pulled it together with only a superficial understanding, where you've just kind of slapped together a few, like the difference in I'll give it to you in Lego terms, because people may not be understanding. And when I was a kid with Lego, you got 2x2 bricks and 2x4 bricks, and you built a house by staggering the bricks, and that was all you could do. And like the most creative thing in the world you could do is build, I don't know, a house with a sloped roof or something. Okay, so today you get the top of Darth Vader and the bottom of Darth Vader, and you plug them together. There's two little pieces. On the other hand, should you lose the bottom of Darth Vader, now you're making like a completely different thing. You're kind of out of luck, and you have all these pieces that are very, very, very specific. And that's what programming is like today. You bring together a much richer panoply of potential pieces. There's like 9 million different kinds of pieces. All you really got to do is figure out which ones to use, and that's the hard part, and that's where Stack Overflow helps you. And you snap them together, and you're done, and you have a big, beautiful thing that's kind of complete. In the old days, you literally had to build that by assembling atoms with tweezers.
So
that's the acceleration, right? So now we can work much faster. Everybody can do that. We can have 25 million people programming when we were really only supposed to have 9 million, and the whole planet. Yeah.
But you're also you're bringing up an interesting, or the thought that occurs to me inside my head is that suddenly all the quote unquote mysterious magic that people who write software used to get paid a tremendous amount of money for, right? Because if you could only use square bricks, yet somebody asked you to make a ball. Yeah. Well, you know, that's kind of magical, right? Are we going to see engineers in the future be a little bit less, well, what's the future of the, what's the future of employment for engineers? Up and to the right or down and to the left?
Up and to the right.
Okay.
Yeah. To the left and down to the left, actually.
Well, I mean, I guess, So,
doesn't look good in Arabic-speaking countries, I guess.
You never know. Okay.
No, that's a sort of an economics question that I have trouble answering. I have not seen it hurt. I mean, it sort of looks like programmers are getting paid more than ever, and we need them more than ever. And part of it is that I think we're just at the beginning of this sort of huge acceleration of when we can finally use this. So if you think about, one thing I think about when I come to LA, because I visit once every year or 2 years, is that, one thing that I've noticed actually is just having Lyft and Uber and having them be cheap and available and like they show up in a minute has literally changed the way I interact with this city. I mean, I can get places without renting a car. I don't have to think about parking. I can go out and get drunk and somebody will magically get me back to the hotel. I don't know how that works. Didn't used to be that way. You used to have to worry about that and get a designated driver and maybe just not even go out. And that's just the beginning, right? So if you think about, and that comes from code. I mean, that comes from code entirely, 100%. There was no new technology that was invented other than, some software that was written by programmers. Right. And combine that with the level at which these innovations are coming, whether it's payments through one click or whatever it may be. Even, God, wow, I didn't even used to be hard to get the internet when you were traveling. And today I went into a branch of my health club in New York. I went into the branch in LA, and my iPad just got on the Wi-Fi because I had already logged on in New York and the Wi-Fi network was connected. And that's just like an obvious thing these days. And do you remember like a few years ago when you'd be like, yeah, fine, I can't check my email until I get home from my trip because those things never work. So we're just at the sort of the beginning of how you see your life changing because programmers are writing code.
So there are three different, let's break that down. You have three different things that you're talking about there. You have the rise of, let's take them in reverse order, down and to the left, which is that you have communications, ubiquitous communications. You have APIs. I sort of think of us all having APIs to things like, well, summon me transportation. I don't have to think about how I get there, if you will. Just bring me something that will take me to where I want to go, if you will. Payments, all that sort of stuff are examples of APIs. And then you have, sort of modules and containers, if you will, which is that now we have a lot of ingredients that we can mix and match together. Yeah. And do you see anything else that's coming our way, in terms of great paradigm changes, or is it?
Wow, that's not.
Yeah, I know.
No, just like the ability to combine things together that are incredibly powerful. I mean, that's the stuff that you're talking about there, whether it's the APIs, the level of modules, the fact that there's an infrastructure of support for this. So, just the internet, I'll stop saying Stack Overflow, but the internet in general gives you sort of the knowledge to pull these things together so rapidly that you don't need to go find a specialist in all these different areas. And that means that essentially we've kind of taken a leap forward in the pieces, the blocks that we're using to build things, and the types of experiences that we can create.
Right. And so, but still to a great degree, this is a pretty sophisticated audience. We're all sitting here in Santa Monica, middle of Silicon Beach. You're in New York, one of the great cities of the world. And I guess my question is, those 25 million people, How widely
Yeah.
spread are they? Are they outside of cities? Are they coming? Or where's your traffic coming from these days?
Yeah. They're not. They're not where you thought they were. Actually, they're not in Silicon Valley, as it turns out.
Where do they come from?
They're just like everywhere. We've actually. What's kind of interesting is if you look at our heat maps of developers seeking jobs versus open jobs, you'll actually discover there's a mismatch there. So when you look across Europe, you'll see developers seeking jobs in the southern parts of Europe, and this should be obvious to economists. Spain, Italy, Greece, developers and openings that are going unfilled are in Germany, Netherlands, Sweden, United Kingdom. In the U.S., again, the jobs going unfilled are on the coasts, and the developers seeking jobs are in the middle. And fortunately, it's taking way too long, but people are starting to figure out that developers can work from anywhere.
I was just about to ask you that.
Yeah. When I try to make a list of the big companies that allow developers to work from anywhere, it's like 2 of them are mine. It's like Stack Overflow and Trello.
Right.
There's GitHub. There's WordPress.
Right.
God, then it starts getting like
it gets pretty thin.
Basecamp.
Right.
It's thin, and then there starts to be small companies that you haven't really heard of. But there is just no reason not to do it. It works great. It's fine. And that will probably be another big change that you see, sort of the next level of this change, is that we'll be able to employ all those people that, for whatever reason, insist on living in Italy.
I can't imagine why.
Yeah.
So what you're saying is that you're expecting that people will be able to work from anywhere on anything.
Yeah.
If you will.
Certainly programmers will. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And I guess the question for let me formulate it in a different way, which is that here, in California, we see tremendous housing costs, right? Anybody try to rent a place up in the Bay Area or even around here? I think in LA, we have the most expensive housing as compared to income of anywhere in the country right now. New York is not exactly cheap either. No. And the Bay Area, I didn't want to go there. Only twice in my life have I ever seen for rent signs in the Bay Area. And that's after all the, after things pop. But I guess the question I have for you is that we still see an awful lot of people who are being asked to move to the job, if you will.
Yeah, I don't get it. I don't, that's my next thing is to,
Really, you're going to go tackle,
I
it would
don't
be great.
care. It's good for me right now because it's very easy. I need to hire a bunch of developers. It's very easy for me to hire developers because if you live in, Boise, Forest of Dean, England, or, Colorado Springs, you can either work for the local dry cleaner chain installing, more dry cleaner things, or you can work for Stack Overflow.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and so,
or one of the other. We can start a company, and I'm all in favor of that too. And hopefully, people in funny places will start to learn how to start.
But you must have an incredible amount of
funny.
You must have an incredible amount of insight into what people are both asking about, looking for in terms of knowledge, but also, quite frankly, what people are looking for in terms of skills and talent.
Yeah,
and,
a little bit.
It seems like, well, I'd love to know what you're seeing in terms of what's the top requests that you're getting these days on the website?
For hiring, or like what kind of questions?
Skills. Why don't we start with skills?
Like what are people trying to learn?
Yeah.
I don't know, React.
React, really?
Yeah. I don't know what it is either. Sorry, no, that wasn't a command. Sorry, there's a programming technology called React. Sorry, I wasn't asking.
I'm reacting to his React.
There's always sort of things going up and going down, and actually everything in the JavaScript world is becoming huge right now because it's starting to become the lingua franca.
Right.
But
Node.js and all that.
Yeah. Now that it's sort of convenient on the server, definitely available on the client, and it's starting to actually perform, so you don't have to use something else for the things that have to be fast. It's increasing in popularity, and everything around it is important and interesting. That said, I don't necessarily care about that stuff. I try to be somewhat ecumenical, but there are people. Our data is 100% open, much like your cities, and anybody that wants to can go BitTorrent a copy of our database with the personal information of users scrubbed out, but everything else is in there, and you can figure out whatever you want. People download it all the time just to do these little analyses of what are the up and coming technologies, what are the what are people learning, how do people behave in social networks. There's been a lot of interesting research done with our data set.
Yeah, it would seem like that would be an incredibly interesting insight into the industry.
Some. Anybody that's interested, incidentally, if you ever take a machine learning class, the data set that you always work on to play with is the Stack Overflow data set, because it's a big data, it's a huge data set. It's got a lot of, it's freely available. It's got a lot of English language text in it, so you can do natural language processing and stuff. There's a lot of interesting things to be learned.
So let's talk about data for a second, which is you've taken a very open data point of view. That's fairly unusual.
Yeah.
You know, there's certainly a lot of people do a lot of things with open APIs. A lot of people do a lot of stuff around, you know, open source, obviously.
Right.
And open data is something that I usually associate with governments.
Yeah, you mean people that have nothing.
Right.
They have no economic interest in.
You know, there's this.
Yeah.
You know, open data is very useful for both transparent government, but also, quite frankly, because, well, you know, it's not like the city government or any government, the federal government. You know, the woman who created data.gov, the U.S. federal open data portal, is here in LA, Jean Holm.
Yeah.
And you know, open data is a fantastic.
It's actually certainly for the governments and the cities that have done it. I know certainly LA and New York. It's really paid off.
Oh, completely.
In terms of getting them stuff that they never would have even remotely dreamed of getting, if they had to build everything with government employees.
But how does it work in your universe?
Our universe is a little weird. Stack Overflow is a weird case. We fell into it a little bit by accident because the site was created because of this other site called Experts Exchange, which is still has an office in the city, but hopefully they're not here. But anyway, they're evil incarnate, and every programmer knew it. And so, but nobody was willing to do anything about it. Right. So I said, if the last thing I do is clone this damn site and make it a little bit better and make it free, so what Experts Exchange had done, which made them evil, is that they started out as an open programmer discussion forum, and programmers talked about things and they asked questions and they got answers, and it was open, and then you could read the answers. You would search on Google and you would find the Experts Exchange and there was your answer. And at some point the business model was not working for them, and it was sold to a new person, and the person that bought it said, well, let's just charge for access to the answers. Right. And now these answers had come from the community and they were donated by programmers who essentially donated them under the unwritten assumption that it is because I am not just helping you, but I am helping a million other people that would come later see this conversation.
Classic open source.
Yes. And so our model was, if I'm going to persuade all the programmers in the world to stop using that evil site that is charging them to read their own answers, I'm going to have to tell them what happened to Experts Exchange where it was sold and then the deal changed can never happen to you. And so part of our value prop early on is we just said, listen, download the data. If we get evil, just go ahead and throw it up somewhere, and then the material, the content came from you, the programmers, belongs to you, the programmers. We don't have any right to put a paywall on it. We're not here. You're not. What are all the weird worlds? You're not cultivating our digital garden or whatever. I mean, you're not sharecroppers or any of those like weird words.
Walled garden.
Yeah. But you are. But it's not. You're not sharecroppers in our walled garden. You're actually generating content that belongs to you, and we'll host it. And fortunately, we found a different business model.
So one of the things, the reason why I sort of started with the New York, LA, Microsoft, Apple thing was because there's always a lot of tension, right? Companies can be very proprietary. Companies can be very, very open. And open source in LA, I'm just sort of using examples from the last 2 years of working for the government. We just open sourced, actually I shouldn't say that. We just have approval to open source something that was written in the LA city government. And you almost can't believe how much debate there could be about open sourcing something. But I come from the private world, so it doesn't really make a lot of sense to me. But you put it through that filter, if you will. And so there's still debates about things like open source, but we still see a lot of proprietary walled gardens. I'm not going to mention brand names, but we're all probably carrying products that are pretty proprietary, shall I say?
Yeah.
And yet, a lot of these proprietary things are also built using a lot of open source, open data, open APIs, open everything. And so there's a tension, if you will.
Sure.
And how do you seem fairly solid on the, we're going to be open, open, open.
I think, we just said let's do default open. No, we didn't really say we're like everything must be open in the universe. Right. Let's start with that as a default. One thing which I thought was really liberating is, if you ask me, I wrote a blog and it had over the years until I pretty much retired a couple years ago. it had something like 1,100 posts or something that I wrote on that blog. And the only one on it that was unequivocally wrong was one, the title of the blog is literally mouth wide shut, and it said, the only policy you should have is just tell everybody, just don't talk about any products until they ship. Right. Everything is like totally secret until you ship. It's basically Apple's policy of not talking about unannounced products until they ship. And the reason I gave was kind of weak, but my weak reasoning was sort of, at least that's a policy everybody can understand, whereas anything else is nuanced. Right. And oddly enough, as Jeff Atwood was building up Stack Overflow, his policy was, let's just talk about everything in public, in full view. The public is nothing you can't talk about in public. And we've been running with it now for 6, 7, 8 years. Right. And I should know the answer to that question. Eight years. Yeah. And it's worked fine. And it's worked out okay. Like, there really has not been a situation where, I mean, sometimes people get angry with you, but they certainly, sometimes they like to say, why are you doing things in secret? Right. When we clearly aren't. But there's always going to be people that want to argue with you on the internet, as it turns out. Well, I call that Joel's Law. I discovered it myself. And people always want to argue with you on the internet. No, but there hasn't been any problem with openness. As it turns out, it works fine. It works fine, yeah.
So the last area I really want to ask you about is culture. Mm-hmm. Because we're sort of treading around culture, if you will, right? There's skills, there's the software, there's the technologies that are all changing, all the rest of it. But when you and I both started writing software, you know, it was I don't want to completely date myself, but there was sort of the Fortran C, you know,
yeah,
that universe, if you will.
Yeah.
I'm not going to mention the other languages because that would just
date you.
Yeah, really horrible. But and there was no such idea as a community, right? You got a profession, you went and wrote software, you did things. The first time I ever really found an incredibly interesting community of software engineers was when I started a game developer about a block away from here, and then eventually, you know, sold that game developer to Electronic Arts. And the video game industry has an incredibly strong culture of, anybody here write software in games? Anybody do that? Oh, cool. It has a very, very strong culture of, you know, how can I put it, competitive software, sort of the way I would describe it. Mm-hmm. And then if you go to other industries, you know, you see different types of culture that are beginning to sort of percolate. Qualcomm had a very distinct culture. Viacom had a very distinct culture. I was the CTO at Universal. That had a very distinct sort of, you know, the joke about Universal is movies by lawyers for lawyers. So you can probably tell what kind of culture that is. And over time, we've seen really the development of different types of engineering cultures, right? There's open source, there's community, there's, you know, open discussion, there's very, very proprietary. You cannot, you know, talk about unannounced products and all the rest of it. But I'm curious as to, you know, what you've seen on Stack Overflow since you started. Where has culture changed in terms of engineers? And how is it changing as it gets, well, now that you've oversubscribed all the engineers across the world, how is it changing there too?
I don't, it's hard for me to tell if it's really changing. I think there are definitely different worlds. There's sort of the engineering world, there's sort of the I'm smarter than you world, there's sort of the sysadmin, bastard operator from hell is the BOF. Right. That's a type of culture that exists. Nevertheless, it is often, you know, one of the things that I think surprised me is, you know, the spirit of people writing answers, the culture of helping one another is bizarre. I can't even say this without it sounding like a weird kumbaya thing. There's like...
You're in California.
It's okay. Yeah, I know, it's fine. 14,000 people or something take about an hour every day to answer somebody's question on Stack Overflow, and they sit there and they will type a long and detailed answer to some question that somebody wrote to solve a problem. Right? No, I mean, if I had to pay them a dime, it would be over. Right. It would be over. That would be the end of it. Right. The culture of sort of helping one another with each other's problems it's sort of weird, and I don't know if it kind of had its origins. I mean, it really goes back to the beginning of time. It goes back to, certainly Usenet was the first instance of Stack Overflow. I think of sort of Usenet as the beginning of what is today Stack Overflow. The culture of, you know, ultimately you'll get help is there. There's sort of a second part of that, which is that you have to know how to ask the question. And what you have to know is that you have to break it down to the minimum possible steps and come up with a question that identifies the actual thing that you don't know, and you have to have that problem-solving mentality. And if you do, you can get help. with that. That's a really weird thing, but it's also a really beautiful thing about the programmer culture. And until you go and work in the fashion industry, for example, it's hard to believe that that's not just human nature.
Right.
You know, until you go actually see entire industries that are doing, you know, what might possibly be the exact opposite of that.
Yeah.
Right. No, very much so. So maybe we'll switch now and start taking questions from the audience. I sort of kept it at a high level,
Cool.
but if you guys want to go as deep as you want, you had your hand up first. And maybe you can say just where you're coming from?
Yeah,
Like,
sure.
Okay.
So I just want to say, Joel, thank you. I personally use Stack a lot, and I'm actually a pre-med from USC. No programming, formal experience at all. And I was volunteering in the clinics, as we all have to. And I noticed inefficiencies in healthcare. And I had a couple ideas, and I decided to learn. So I use YouTube and Stack Overflow, like, a lot. So now I'm actually doing more complex stuff, but it's effectively, what I've realized is YouTube and Stack allow us to achieve our dreams.
Right.
And really, and I just want to ask you, where do you see education going?
Yeah,
Right.
Snapchat. Oh,
And I would be part of the group of developers you mentioned who are kind of out there and learning on their own. And yeah, if you can elaborate.
Yeah, so the question is, where do I see education going, especially online? And that is sort of an interesting story, because there are an enormous number of things, everything from like Code Academy, and like, there's 18,000 different ways to learn programming online that have been built. There's a lot of offline ways to build programming. There's to learn programming. There's a lot of schools that have taken their curriculum online. Like, kind of the material is out there. And of course, it only works if there's really motivation there. And one of the things that I think is really neat is how anybody that tells you the story of how they learned to program will include Stack Overflow on the list. So that is definitely like a kind of a component of it. It sort of has to be. And the actual reason is that where it comes from is that without motivation, it doesn't happen. And so the reason so many people sign up to take some online university course in programming and go to the first 2 lectures and then sort of disappear, they have like 98% dropout rates in some of those courses, is because they actually don't care. The person taking that course does not need to know how to program. They're not driven. They don't have whatever that source of motivation is to do it. Without it, they can't. But if you have that motivation, if you have that spark inside you to learn something, you'll go dig it out of wherever you want to dig it out of. And I was joking about saying people are going to learn it from Snapchat, but if they're not already, the children will be learning it from Snapchat, and it's going to be bizarre. But they'll figure out a way to learn programming on Snapchat.
I guess part B of this question is, will you be able to recognize learning, education on software, how to write software in the future?
Yeah.
I mean, is it something
Or will it just be
or
something?
it just will be?
Yeah, that everybody kind of. Well, I mean, one thing, fortunately, a lot of progress is being made in curriculums, curricula. We all have curriculum. I think we'll probably make progress in this country towards replacing some of the more obscure requirements to learn Latin that we have in place with obscure requirements to learn. It'll probably be, we'll all have to learn Fortran or something. But at least it will be programming.
I mean, okay, so let's ask it a different way. President Obama just said that he's going to spend $4 billion on computer science. And, Computer Science Education Week, didn't know it existed, but it exists. It happened just a month or 2 back. If you were President Obama, how would you spend the $4 billion? And don't say on Stack Overflow.
That one's actually kind of tough. I was sort of involved. I don't want to say the genesis of this, but Fred Wilson, who is in town right now, by the way, but he's one of our investors, and he's a venture capitalist in New York, and he got very excited about improving the quality of education in computer science in schools, and started a pilot program with New York City with a public school that opened. It's called the New York Academy for Software Engineering, AFSE, is the name of the school, and it's actually a public high school in New York. It's open admission, meaning anybody can go. It's not like Stuyvesant where you have to take a test and it's only for the smartest kids. It's for anybody. And they all learn how to program. They all learn software engineering. They have a curriculum, and I was actually on the curriculum committee for the school. And it's kind of surprising how little material is out there and how poorly developed it is right now, just because there hasn't been the budget to develop really good computer science material, and that material changes all the time. A lot of times you end up teaching kids sort of toy programming languages. Maybe okay, maybe you're teaching them the right concepts like binary counting by teaching them colorful things with blocks that make robots move around, and so they're intrigued. Maybe there are other kids that would be more intrigued by just taking out Kernahan and Ritchie and learning, how to do linked lists and C on Unix. I don't know, but when you look around, there aren't that many choices. There isn't that much curriculum that's sort of available. So I would say actually developing curriculum and developing multiple curriculums that people can use might be something that's scalable and useful.
How many people here have bought a book to learn how to write software?
Oh.
Wow. Okay, maybe half. Okay, anybody? Next question? Yes, sir.
Yeah, so there are certain trades or careers that where, the older you're in the field and the older you are, you're actually more valued. But in terms of software development and engineering, that doesn't seem to be always the case. I've seen discrimination against age before. So for the software industry, what is the best approach for those who are getting up in years?
Yeah, like me. So the question was, as you, what is the huh?
Put up the mic.
Oh yeah, that's right. Forgive me for restating this. What is the best approach for people that are getting older in the software industry, given that this seems to be a field in which the more skills are held by the younger people in the field than the older people in the field? I don't really, as an older person in the field, I don't really agree with that statement. I've seen actually two things that are true. One is we definitely have a field that appears to stay young. It's not clear if that's because the field is just growing or if people genuinely, as they get older, just don't want to stay as programmers. The ones that do appear to be just as good as the ones that are young. A lot of times they move into management. I think one of the reasons that they're moving into management, and this is just my personal bias, I think they're moving into management because the management that is done today is much harder than the management that was done in 1950. And it takes people that have a lot more years of experience to be able to pull it off. And I can kind of go into that in a little bit more detail and explain that one, but it's a little bit of a diversion. But essentially, what I see in management is let's say, let's take an old school management system like the Army in 1923. So in the Army in 1923, when you were 19, you could be a commander. And as a commander, you could give orders, you could punish people for refusing to implement orders, you could possibly throw people out of the Army or whatever if the punishing didn't work. And I think that was it. Maybe you could show people how to do something. You really had 4 or 5 very, very simple tools, but it was basically just give them orders and then they have to do the thing or you punish them. And that's how you managed people as a 19-year-old in an Army in 1925. Now, the way that you manage people in a high-tech software company today, when they're like, literally they have pinned up their job offer from Google or MySpace or whatever in their cubicle as evidence that you better not mess with them. And this is sort of this, and they're entitled millennials and whatever. I don't know. I could go on and on. Whatever they are, whatever reason it is. The type of management problems you might suddenly face is realizing, oh, wait a minute, this employee is performing poorly because they just got married and moved in with their spouse, with their new husband or wife. Or this person may be performing poorly because they're angry about so-and-so, or because their dog died, or because they actually don't know how to do something and they don't really know how to express this, or because they're struggling with an interpersonal relationship type problem. And you actually have a list of 947 things that can go wrong in people's lives that all translate into they become sort of less successful as programmers. And one of the things that managers have to do, just one of the 93 things that they have to do today, is actually deal with all those types of personal problems that actually happen to people. And honestly, the 50-year-olds and the 60-year-olds know more. They've had more experience with people. They have more ways of knowing how to deal with those situations. So I had a situation where I literally discovered that somebody that we thought was a star employee was sort of behaving poorly, not being as successful as they had been before. And I said, his manager was like, I think I'm going to have to fire him even though he's my star employee. And I said, well, listen, I just heard that he just moved in with his boyfriend. He's just probably, that's one of the 4 stressors in life. The stressors in life are changing your living arrangements, changing who you, somebody died, somebody was born, whatever. The stressors in life, and it's all changing your living arrangements, actually. It's like literally going to sleep in a different house or with different people in the house, which counts all of them. And those are the biggest stressors in life. And I said, well, he's got one of them. And so maybe it's that. And it blew his mind, this manager, that I said that is, because it never occurred to him that as a manager, that was the kind of thing he had to know or think about. And like, how old were you when you learned that, and when was the first time So actually, I see a couple of things going on here. One is that the skill of managing software teams and the skill of managing software development has gotten ridiculously hard. There's no way that you can do it without kind of a substantial amount of experience, even relative to 10 or 20 years ago. But that's okay, because we're gaining that experience as we go along. The skill of programming is sort of another thing you see, which is that the young developers who appear to be really good at things are actually making a lot of mistakes, and then they're fixing them really fast. And the older developers are making far fewer mistakes, but they're not fixing them. So they look like they're going slower, but they're actually getting to the same place at the same speed. And so one of the things, even when you look around and you look at what appears to be a slowing down of developers as they get older, they're also getting really, really smart. And I have literally walked into, years after I stopped coding, I would walk into offices with developers who were sitting there after 2 days of struggling with some particular problem, and just looked at what they happened to have up on the screen. And literally, they were in a debugger. They had broken into a debugger somewhere, and I still knew that the EAX register holds the return value that was just returned, and I literally looked at that and said, this is probably this, because it reminded me of something, because I had seen so much code that I knew that if the return value was 0, that reminded me of 19,000 other things. And I debugged a problem that they'd been working on for 2 days just by looking, like not touching the keyboard, looking at the screen in like 1 second. They're like, how the hell did you do that? And part of it is like, as you get experience, you actually kind of learn how to do those things. So there is sort of a remarkable amount of learning that goes on that's incredibly useful. It may be somewhat invisible in our field, but it's there.
I found myself thinking, and let me ask a question which I think a lot of us would like to know. You and I both very much agree on this, despite my earlier joke, which is that it seems that as software development gets more, shall we say, human, the management becomes more talent management and human management, we should start to see a more diverse population of people also.
I hope so.
Right? I mean, it seems like we get less and less out of sort of rote engineering-driven stuff and more into, well, let's call it crunchy California, holistic human.
Yeah. Well, first of all, obviously, if you're going to build, as these applications are actually writing the script for our future, you absolutely positively need a diverse community of people to write the script, because otherwise you're writing a script that doesn't make any sense. It's suitable for venture capitalists in Palo Alto, and makes no sense for any of the rest of us.
So do you think that you think we're going to start to see more and more of the barriers breaking down for male and female?
I hope so. I mean, I feel like there's an imperative to do that. I don't really know where that's going to come from.
Right.
I have a personal, I have a personal story I can share a little bit, which is that for about a year ago, I was a One Direction fan. Does anybody even know what that is? Sorry, it's a boy band. And so I went to the One Direction concert with my 3 gay friends. And I'm gay too, for those of you who don't know. And it was in Philadelphia. We went to the one in Philadelphia because it was cheaper and we could get tickets than the one in New York. And the one in Philadelphia was really a very suburban audience. So I could not, like, it was an entire football stadium, and the whole floor of the stadium they filled with chairs. So it was like a big concert. Wow. And there were pretty much all 12-year-old girls, and some 11-year-olds, and some of their parents who were like really bored. So like if there were any adult men in the audience, they're like, and they were seated. Right. They weren't standing.
For diversity.
Not that you can tell. Yeah. But I was standing and I was enjoying the concert, and at some point I just started to feel creepier and creepier and creepier. Right. as the concert went on, because it was clear that I did not belong in an audience full of 12-year-olds. Right. And but I still like One Direction. I know that they broke up and they're getting back together, and Zayn has I know.
This did not go where I thought it was going to go.
Sorry. And I'm not going to go to another One Direction concert. Forget it. I mean, first of all, it's so over. No. Because it's just like I feel awkward in that situation. And you know, what occurred to me is actually if you're a girl learning how to program and you go on Stack Overflow and everybody appears to be male, then you're going to feel like there's something weird. You're going to feel that same feeling that I was feeling, which is like there's something wrong. Like you can fight it, but it's a stressor, right? It's like a thing that you have to it's going to make you tired at the end of every day. To have that experience, and hopefully you're strong enough to overcome it, but it is a thing that particularly happens. And when I think about this, I can't do much, but what I can do is actually say, if you are a female, if you're a minority on Stack Overflow, put your friggin' identity in your avatar so we can see you, so that girls see you, so that we understand that so that they understand that there's diversity in this profession. And it's not necessary to use your real name on Stack Overflow, and if people harass you, we will kill them dead. I mean, we actually have really good moderation. Like Stack Overflow is one of the few communities where it's not a discussion community, thank God. And so nobody's going to scream censorship if we shoot down people for harassing. And so that argument doesn't even apply. It's one of the safest places to participate online. There's deep moderation everywhere. There's a little button to flag a moderator. The moderators are excellent and have zero tolerance. And so, so it is actually an opportunity to kind of make an example. And show that the field is not really 100%. People have told me stories where they literally, I wrote that I was gay somewhere on page 97 of my blog, and people have told me stories that they went into the field of programming because they saw this, and it had never occurred to them that they could be a gay programmer, which is weird nowadays, but at the time. And that's something that sort of everybody has an opportunity to do.
Well, from your lips to God's ears. Let's see.
Yeah.
Yes, sir. You had a question.
Kind of piggybacking on the same thing. If you're a developer for a long period of time, it seems like there's kind of a pay cap that happens eventually. And the only way you can really bust out of that is becoming a contractor. So they can give you all the free lunches you want and beanbags and stuff. But is that there's not enough developers everywhere? But if you kind of pay cap.
The question was, if you're a developer, there seems to be a pay cap, and there's no real way to bust out of that other than becoming a contractor. If there's a contractor, you actually hit the same pay cap, it's just double. And you're paying your own taxes and whatever, and you're not working the same number of hours, so it kind of comes out in the wash. There is sort of a pay cap for, quote-unquote LOB developers. One of the reasons actually is there's kind of a productivity cap for developers. No offense, but you still got to type those lines of code, and you can get really efficient, you get really smart about how you do it. And unfortunately, the employers have trouble kind of recognizing the difference between the so-called 10x engineer and the 1x engineer, which is definitely a thing that exists. It exists not necessarily because some engineers are really fast and really smart and type really well, but because they just know things and they figure things out and they do things that turn out to be much more valuable. I think there are sort of a couple of exceptions to this, which is as you look over the lifetime of and this is not, I'm not an economist, you look over the lifetime of a software developer, you'll discover that there are sort of opportunities in equity, in starting companies, in working for startups. And one of the things that seems to happen to good developers is that they figure out what the right companies are and they join them at the right time and they have a little bit of equity. And over the course of a career, they will at some point have worked at a couple of companies that the equity was worth actually kind of enough to make a substantial difference when you look at their kind of overall salary over the years. The truth is, we're still in the 1%er range, so it's not like there's some big, great national tragedy happening here, in this country at least, in terms of the underpaying of developers. But you will also actually see once in a while, and people will always point out the Facebook salaries and the Google salaries, Facebook especially, are known to be extremely high. And then they'll say, well, I guess I'll just go to Facebook. Just so you know, as they say in economics, the market does clear. That means those salaries are really high because those places suck to work at. And that's how much they have to pay to get a developer to work there. And in fact, if you see a startup where the salaries seem to be unusually low, that means that people friggin' love it. Yeah.
Do you have a question? Yes. Yes, you in the red scarf.
Can we start a new thread?
New thread.
Just as an Excel guy, we could keep going with the pay gap. This is in Excel, it's actually the worst in IT and finance, which is great for an Excel developer like myself. But just because you're an Excel guy, I'm curious about your thoughts on, are we living in a time
are we living in a time when Excel will graduate from the kids' table in the eyes of the development world? Wow. So many assumptions packed into that one statement. The one thing that I have actually kind of heard universally is that developers actually quite admire Excel. I don't think they necessarily know it that well. But one thing I've heard more times than I care to count is even the people that are very anti-Microsoft for various reasons will somehow single out Excel as the one thing that they like that sort of came from there. I don't. I actually think that what's really happening is that there's sort of pure software development, and then there's kind of business, what's the word, like business process stuff or business work, just pure business work. And Excel is like halfway between those two things, right? So Excel is really, really important in the accounting department. And it's being used by people that are CPAs, but they also kind of have half a foot in the programming world. Excel is really, really important in finance, in the finance industry. When I worked on the Excel team, I went to a big bank in New York that was doing, was one of the pioneers in derivative trading. And they said, we calculated that we make more money from Excel in a day than Microsoft makes in a year. And essentially what they were saying is that they were doing these derivative trades that would not have been possible if it weren't for Excel, because they could quickly create a model, figure out what something was worth and price it. And to write that code would have been impossible. And they were able to do these crazy derivative trades, which, well, they did bring down Orange County, as I remember, but, and it was that bank. But but we're in Los Angeles County, so that doesn't
I think they should protect you from going further.
I actually think that essentially what you're perceiving as Excel being a kids' table or whatever is simply like the programmers that are over here and don't even understand the business side over here, and you're halfway to the business side, so that's all that is.
It's at every table. Other questions? Let me ask from the back, if I can.
Yeah, have you answered questions on Stack Overflow?
Have I answered questions? Oh, sure. In fact, I have one of the highest ranked answers in COBOL. Yeah. And it turns out my answer is terrible because I don't know COBOL. But everybody was like, "Oh my God, Joel Spolsky! What about?" Yeah, I answered a lot in the early days, actually.
I could. Yes, sir.
Could you talk a little bit about how the reputation part started on Stack Overflow, the credits, and where you think reputation as a mechanism might go in the future?
How did reputation start on Stack Overflow, and where is the reputation as a mechanism going to go in the future? It sort of started from the observation that it takes the lightest possible touch to motivate people to do things. There are systems. There were definitely reputation systems before Stack Overflow. Some of them were worth things, some of them were not worth things. One thing to notice is that the frequent flyer mile systems that the airlines invented, where they give you a number that goes up, were perceived as you can earn some miles to go on a trip somewhere, but everybody knew that they weren't going to ever earn enough miles. But nevertheless, they were still happy to see a number going up. There were systems like, which I saw and participated in, like I think Reddit, that gave you a number in parentheses after your name, and I don't remember where they got it from. I don't think they were necessarily first. Oh yeah, Slashdot gave you a number. Yeah, okay.
Which went to the dark side, but I'll leave it there.
Yeah. And so you could actually see that like behavior can be influenced by something as simple as just sort of giving you a number which goes up, and that was we sort of thought that was a useful lesson to sort of create a currency to keep Stack Overflow going in a certain direction. There's a bunch of other stuff around that. We have badges and voting and stuff like that. All that kind of stuff on Stack Overflow and the reputation number that it adds up to has been called gamification, and I don't like object to the word gamification.
It's an evil word.
Is it? Okay.
Yeah, it's evil.
I don't care.
Yeah.
It's not like I feel bad that they say that we invented this. Where the actual evils come on. Gamification, I think, is a little bit like subliminal messages, right, which is that you can't make somebody do something they weren't going to do anyway. And it's a very, very, very weak force. It's about the 19th weakest force, right, of all the 18 forces of software. I should write a like a new age book.
I think
The
there's
19
a question
forces
that you
of
should
software.
ask on Stack Overflow. He'll answer.
It's a really, really weak force. And I see people try to overuse it, where they're like, they're going to build a whole system and they're going to get people to like lose weight through gamification, and they won't. They're only going to do the things that they were going to do anyway, and you might be able to shape the way in which they do it, and you can shape the conversation around how they do it. So one of the most important things on Stack Overflow for us, we have these badges that do nothing for you except that you find out when you got them, and you can work towards them, and then you can see that you have them, and you imagine that other people know that you have them, but they really don't. And I mean, they could find out, but you imagine, oh my God, look at me with all my badges, and they're just like, oh, you answered my question, I will now cut and paste the code, thank you. Right. And it's okay, that's enough to motivate you to get those badges. What's really important is that everybody that participates in the site for a while will come across certain questions. They'll say things like, should I be allowed to answer my own question? And then they'll go and they'll look, and there's a badge that you can earn only for answering your own question. And they'll say, okay, well, that's obviously, if there's a badge for that, that's obviously something they want to happen. And therefore, the system must want it. So very, very, very small, light touches are enough to shape the mores of the community and the way in which the community behaves, especially in the early days. We got them all kind of doing things because that's the way the game worked. Eventually, they started doing them because they understood why they made sense to make the site successful. I don't think you can go much farther with it, because I have seen startups fail because they tried to take gamification a little bit farther and get them to do things that they weren't going to do.
Right. So maybe two more questions.
Thanks for coming, Joel.
You're welcome.
You kind of touched on it a little bit in the beginning with the 2 million uniques, 3 million, and then 9 million, and then with experts exchange. How was that user acquisition process like in the beginning?
What was the user acquisition process like in the beginning of Stack Overflow when we went from 2 million, 3 million, et cetera, all the way up to we are now at 25 million uniques? The part of the iceberg that is under the sea, which you can't see, Stack Exchange, Stack Overflow, launched in August, September 2008. And on the first, sort of in the first days, I think we had somewhere around 30,000 regular visitors a day. That number, not coincidentally, is the same number of regular visitors we had on Joel Software in the first day. And in fact, the only reason we got 30,000 people to visit on day one was because I had spent 8 years building that audience on Joel Software. Essentially that was 8 years of just writing a blog every single day and getting people to follow and getting people to click on that. And as a little audience of 30,000 people, but they were programmers. And there was a sort of critical mass that was necessary in Stack Overflow just in the first week, where people had to type a question, and then when they got an answer in 5 minutes, they were like, oh my God. And they only got an answer in 5 minutes because there were 30,000 people there, and only 30,000 people there because I spent 8 years building that audience. And so if you launch Stack Overflow today without 30,000 people, and everything else was the same, it is my belief that it would not have caught on, and maybe 8 years later, it finally something would have started to happen. But in the meantime, Quora would have come along, or 19 other things would have gotten created. Twitter, people would be asking questions on Snapchat.
Yeah. I was the CTO for Vivendi Universal and Blizzard and World of Warcraft and all that, and we did a year-long beta test, if you may all remember, with Warcraft, and the marketing budget for World of Warcraft was $1 million. For a game that made about $1.2 billion, I think, the first year or so. And the reason why was because those million people, they marketed the game, and I think that's essentially what you're saying is the 30,000. Yep. So
yeah, there were sort of two other effects. Sort of the next effect is that for various reasons, the content that we had is exactly the content that Google needed. So Google started sending us tons of traffic, and so at some point we were gaining 30,000 users a day. Pretty quickly, actually, we were gaining at a much, much faster rate, and sort of that curve continued sort of exponential growth because it was genuinely doing something for people, so they were telling each other. But then Google essentially was doing word of mouth for us because we had answers to so many questions pretty quickly, and that sort of sealed our fate.
Yeah, same with Wikipedia.
Yeah, Wikipedia, very similar.
Let's just take one more question, then we'll let it. How about you?
Excuse my English, I'm Swedish, but this is further off topic as well. What do you think about the AI problem and the control problem that's on the table right now? Open AI initiative. Do you have any thoughts on it?
Let me try to repeat the question, which is, what do you think about the AI problem? Which I assume is, there's a bunch of AI questions, but the one that you're probably asking about is, are AIs going to take over the world and be dangerous for the humans, or?
Yes, more or less.
Okay. Okay.
The control problem.
I see.
Yeah.
The AIs will escape and they'll run amok.
And then we'll get gray goo, right? It'll, yeah. They'll eat each other? No.
It's your question.
I see. You know what's going to happen is that this will happen. The AIs will escape and they'll run amok, and we'll be trying to fight them for about 3 hours, and then one of them will need a Flash upgrade, Adobe Flash. And the whole thing will come to a screeching halt, and we will be saved. Yeah.
Or the alternative is, can you prove that you're actually not an AI? So, okay.
Cool.
You want to keep going?
Good. No, thank you very much, everyone. That was a good question to go out on, I think.
Thank you all for coming. And,
thank you. We have there's a few stickers, Stack Overflow stickers and Trello stickers. If you use Trello and you want a sticker of my dog to put on your laptop, there are a few over here. Not that many. Go ahead and fight over them.
There are fewer stickers than there are humans, as opposed to.
Yeah. As opposed to the AI problem.